Jack had never been a man of big dreams. He was just a simple janitor, sweeping floors and cleaning windows in a towering office building. Every day was the same. Wake up, work, go home, sleep, repeat. No surprises, no excitement, and certainly nothing out of the ordinary. But all of that changed in an instant. It was a regular Wednesday afternoon. The streets buzzed with energy as office workers rushed to their cars, cafes filled with chatter, and life carried on as usual. Jack was outside, broom in hand, sweeping fallen leaves off the sidewalk, when something caught his eye. At first, it seemed like nothing. A boy walking alone, a white cane tapping against the pavement. But then, Jack noticed something that made his heart race. Two men dressed in dark clothes were following him. Something was off. They weren't guiding him. Not in the way someone would help a blind child. They were too close, whispering to each other, their hands slightly nudging the boy forward. Jack's grip tightened on his broom. His gut told him something was very, very wrong. Without thinking, he dropped the broom behind the trash can and started walking after them, keeping his distance. The boy, no older than 12, seemed hesitant, almost like he knew something was wrong, but didn't want to believe it. The men led him down a quieter street, away from the crowds, then toward a run-down house at the end of the block. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears as he watched the door slam shut behind them. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have told themselves it wasn't their problem. But Jack wasn't most people. He couldn't just walk away. Heart hammering, he moved closer, staying low, trying not to be seen. The house was old, the windows covered in grime. He crept to the back door and, to his surprise, found it slightly open. His breath hitched. The air inside was thick and musty, the kind of place that made your skin crawl. Then he heard it. A soft, scared voice coming from a nearby room. "Hello?" Jack whispered, stepping in cautiously. The boy flinched, his hands trembling as he reached out into the darkness. Who are you?" "I'm here to help," Jack whispered. "We need to get out of here. Can you walk?" The boy nodded, his face pale with fear. Jack took his hand, guiding him through the shadows, every second feeling like an eternity. The moment they slipped out the back door, Jack knew the men could return at any moment. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, calling for a taxi. The boy clung to his arm, his body trembling. They made it to the police station safely, but as Jack sat there, waiting for answers, a news report flashed on the screen. His stomach dropped. Breaking news: Ethan Grant, the blind son of one of Japan's wealthiest families, was kidnapped last night. Authorities are searching for any leads. Jack froze. His mouth went dry. Ethan Grant? The boy sitting next to him, and then his phone rang. An unknown number. Jack swallowed hard and answered. A deep voice spoke. "Is this Jack? The man who saved my son?" Jack's world was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Jack gripped his phone tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice on the other end was deep, steady, and carried an air of power. "Is this Jack?" the man repeated. "The man who saved my son?" Jack hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, this is Jack." There was silence, then a slow exhale from the other end. "I need to meet you. Tomorrow. My mansion. You saved my boy, and I owe you more than you can imagine." Jack could barely process what was happening. He wasn't the kind of guy who got invited to fancy mansions, let alone by billionaires. His entire life had been spent cleaning other people's messes, staying unnoticed. But now, in a single day, everything had flipped upside down. He looked at Ethan, who sat quietly beside him, his small hands resting on his lap. The boy had been through so much, yet there was a calmness about him, like he had learned to trust Jack in that short time. The next morning, Jack found himself standing in front of an iron gate so tall, it seemed to touch the sky. The mansion. Behind it looked like something out of a movie. Huge, elegant, and screaming wealth. As soon as he approached, the gates slowly opened, and a sharply dressed butler greeted him with a polite nod. "Mr. Grant is expecting you," he said, leading Jack inside. Jack tried to ignore how out of place he felt. His clothes were simple, his shoes worn out. But none of that seemed to matter as he stepped into a world of luxury he had never seen before. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, expensive paintings lined the walls, and everything smelled like fresh roses. Then, at the end of the long, polished hallway, he saw him, Ethan's father. Mr. Grant was a tall man with sharp eyes and a presence that filled the room. He stood up from his chair, walking toward Jack with purpose. Without hesitation, he extended his hand. "Jack," he said, his voice strong yet filled with gratitude. "You saved my son's life. There is no way I can ever repay you." Jack shook his hand, still trying to process everything. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Mr. Grant said, shaking his head. "Most people would have looked away. You didn't. That makes you different." They sat down, and Jack finally got some answers. The men who had taken Ethan weren't just random criminals. They were professionals, hired for a reason. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. It was personal. Mr. Grant's voice turned serious. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't ask for ransom. They didn't contact me. That means this wasn't about money. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. If it wasn't about money, then what was it about? Revenge? Power? Something even worse? As Mr. Grant spoke, Jack realized how deep he had gotten himself into. He had saved Ethan, but in doing so, he had stepped into a dangerous world he didn't understand. A world where billionaires had enemies, and those enemies played a much darker game. Then Mr. Grant said something that sent a wave of uncertainty through Jack. "I need your help, Jack." Jack blinked. "My help?" Mr. Grant nodded. "You're the only one who saw them up close. The only one who knows what they look like. And after what you did, I trust you." Jack had never been a hero. He had never been in the middle of anything this big. But now, he wasn't just a janitor. He was part of something much bigger, and whether he liked it or not, there was no turning back. Jack sat frozen, staring at Mr. Grant. He wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. "You need my help?" he repeated. Mr. Grant leaned forward, his sharp gaze never leaving Jack's. "Yes. You're the only one who saw those men up close. The police are doing their part, but I need someone I can trust. Someone who isn't part of the system. Whoever did this is still out there, and I need to know why they took my son." Jack felt the weight of those words settle on him. He had never been involved in anything like this before. He was just a janitor. An ordinary guy who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. But now, sitting in this grand mansion, hearing Mr. Grant's words, he realized something. He couldn't walk away. Ethan was safe because of him, but the people who had taken him weren't finished, and that meant danger could come back at any time. Jack took a deep breath. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll help." Mr. Grant's expression softened, and for the first time, Jack saw something in his eyes. Respect. "Thank you, Jack," he said. "This means more than you know." The next few days moved fast. With Mr. Grant's resources, Jack was given security footage, reports, and even access to private investigators. It was overwhelming at first, but as Jack studied everything, a pattern started to form. The men who had taken Ethan weren't acting alone. They had been working for someone, a shadow behind the scenes, pulling the strings. Then, one night, everything changed. Jack was at the restaurant, going over what he had learned, when he noticed something strange. A man sitting alone in the corner. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. But there was something familiar about him. Jack's mind raced. Could it be one of the kidnappers? Jack's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his phone and quickly sent a message to Mr. Grant. "I think one of them is here." Within minutes, a black car pulled up outside. Mr. Grant stepped out, flanked by 2 security men. Jack's heart pounded as they approached. The man, in the cap, must have sensed something was wrong, because he stood up abruptly and started toward the door. But Jack was faster. He stepped in front of him, blocking his way. "Not so fast," he said, his voice steady despite the fear racing through him. The man hesitated, glancing between Jack and Mr. Grant's men. Then, with a resigned sigh, he sat back down. The next moments were a blur. The security team restrained the man, and soon the police arrived. Under pressure, he finally spoke. The truth was more shocking than anyone had expected. The kidnapping wasn't about money. It was about revenge. Years ago, Mr. Grant had exposed corruption within a powerful business empire, leading to the downfall of a dangerous man. That man had never forgotten. Or forgiven. And now, he had tried to make Mr. Grant suffer the way he had suffered. But because of Jack, the plan had failed. The following morning, Jack sat across from Mr. Grant once again. The threat was over. The men behind the kidnapping had been arrested, and Ethan was safe. Jack should have felt relieved, but instead he felt different. Stronger. Like he had stepped into a new version of himself. Mr. Grant studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You know, Jack," he said, "I was right about you. You're more than just a janitor." Jack chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I am." A few months later, Jack stood outside his restaurant watching the city come to life. He had come so far, from sweeping floors to running a business, from an unnoticed janitor to someone who had made a difference. As he turned to go back inside, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. "Thanks for everything, Jack. You're my hero." Jack smiled, slipping the phone into his pocket. He had never set out to be a hero. He had just done what felt right. But sometimes, that was all it took to change everything.